Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we continue our study of the second book of Samuel, that's Shmuel Bet. We are in the middle of chapter 15, that's Perek Tet Vav. We are up to verse 19, Pasuk Yud Tet. And we have just read of David's decision to evacuate his supporters from the city of Jerusalem in order to save the city from inevitable warfare and destruction when Avshalom and his supporters come to attack the king and take over the kingdom from his father David. So we just finished reading in the last verse that they stopped as they were leaving the city at the last building, the last home on the outskirts of the city before they actually left the city. And they're there now, and we had read of David and his supporters, his top-level troops that were loyal to him, plus the 600 Gittites. These are the Philistine people from Gat who were David's supporters. Excuse me. So in verse 19 begins, Vayomer HaMelech El Itai Hagiti. The king said to Itai the Gittite. Itai is one of these Philistine supporters of David. Presumably, he was probably the leader of the group. So it says to him, Lama telech gamata itanu. Why are you coming with us? We're running, right? You came to support us while I was sitting on the throne, I understand. But now I'm running. Why are you coming with me? And gam ata itanu. Right? Why are you also coming with us? It's one thing, my supporters, but you guys, v'shev im hamelech, all right? Go back and stay with the king. And he's staying here. Go back and stay with the new king. It's fascinating how David says this, knowing that when Absalom comes into Jerusalem, he's going to set himself up as the new king. So you are here. I understand when you're here to support the king, so go stay with the new king. King Nachriata, you are a foreigner. You're not one of the Israelites. This is not your fight. Why should you get involved in this civil war on my side when I'm apparently losing? You can also go back to your place. Another way of interpreting is that you are also a refugee from your place. So you're a foreigner, you're a refugee. Go to where the strength is. Go to where the power is. Stick with the king that's coming in. Timol bo'echa. You just came yesterday. Now, obviously, this doesn't mean literally yesterday, but it means you recently came and joined us. Presumably when I was strong. V'hayom ani acha imanu lalechas. And now I'm going to make you wander around as a refugee. You just got here as a refugee from your place. I'm going wherever I'm going. I don't even know where I'm going, David says. I don't know where this is going to end. I don't know if this is ever going to end. I might be running for the rest of my life from Avshalom. And you're just going to keep hanging with me. Go back and take your people with you. And be kind and true to them. So apparently this does verify that Itai was indeed an influential leader of this group of 600 Gittites or Philistines, and he's telling him, go take your people, they're looking up to you, keep them safe, don't make them into a bunch of refugees. Vayan Itai at Melech Vayomar, and Itai answered the king. So now the verse calls David the king, because from the perspective of the verse of the writer of the words here, David is the legitimate king. So Itai says to David, Vayomar, and he says, Chai Adonai, by life, by the Lord's life, by the Lord of, as God lives, in other words, V'chai Adonai Hamelach, and by as the King David, my master, lives, Ki bimkom asher yesham Adonai Hamelach, wherever place you, my master, will be, im l'mavet im l'chaim, whether that's going to bring about our death or our life, kisham yavdacha, that is the place where your servant will remain. He swore his loyalty to David. So this person from Gat and the men that followed him remembered the long history of David and knew David was more than what he seems to be now, a desperate refugee fleeing from his son, but that David had the special qualities that make him the legitimate king. Vayomer David el Itai, lech ba'avar. And David says again, David says to Itai, he says, go ahead and pass in front of me, right? Vayavor Itai agiti v'chol anashav v'chol ataf asher ito. And Ittai the Gittite and all of his men and the children that were with them marched ahead of David to lead the party of David out into the wilderness. And the entire land, the people of Jerusalem, remember, as we said, the people of Jerusalem are still loyal to David. They're crying in a loud voice, and everyone is passing by. So this entire crowd of people that's going out with David into as refugees are passing in front of David. And the king then crossed over Nachal Kidron, the valley that is to the, I think it's the northeast of Jerusalem, so he had to cross the Nachal, the wadi, the riverbed, and al pnei derech et hamidbar, and the entire group of people, the entire crowd, and the soldiers passed in the on the road that goes out into the Judean desert. And if you want to imagine this scene when one is standing near the Temple Mountain, looking out over the Kidron Valley towards Har Zeitim, towards the Mount of Olives, one can imagine this entire entourage of people running as refugees from the coming invasion of Avshalom and his forces. V'hinei gam Tzadok. In addition, Tzadok, who is the Kohen, who is the high, the priest, v'chol halviim ito, and together with him were all of the Leviim, all of the Levites, nosim et aron brit Elohim. They are carrying the ark of the covenant of God. Vayatziku et aron Elohim, and they put down the ark of God so that the people passed in front of it with the intention, presumably, of bringing the ark out with David. And this was the habit of the people until now. When the king went out, whether it was usually to war, but when the king went out, the ark went with him as a symbol of God and to protect and to protect the people. And we saw before how people made the mistake, especially King Saul, of thinking that the ark had some magical power that it gave the people protection. And we're going to see David is going to teach us a very different lesson in just a moment. Vayal Eviatar, and Eviatar, right? That's David's high priest. He came up until everyone that was leaving passed from the city, has left the city. So this entire entourage left the city, and Eviatar followed them at the end. And the king said to Tzadok, presumably the king also stopped and waited as everyone passed by. So he said, Hashev et aron ho'olim ha'ir, return the ark of God to the city. Im emtzochein be'enei Adonai, I hope, literally it means if I shall find, in other words, I hope that I shall find favor in the eyes of God. V'heshivani, and he will return me. V'hirani otovi et naveu, and he will be able to let me see the ark again and its place where it resides. This is remarkable. Saul would have said something very different. He would have brought the ark along for protection, as if it provided protection. David is saying, it is me. I have to find favor with God in order for me to come back to Jerusalem. It's my behavior that matters. It's what I do. It's my decisions. It's how I act that will affect the outcome as to whether or not I come back. It's not the magical ark. This is a crucial, this is often overlooked, but it's one of the most important points in the development of the theology that is the basis of Judaism and the basis of monotheism. And that is that there is no magical ark that's going to provide protection, but it is the person's behavior. It is I that have to find favor with God based on what I do. And then I will be able to come back and see the ark. And the ark then will be an expression of my relationship to God. It may help me and aid me create and to deepen and create my connection with God. That will happen upon my return. That is the point of the ark, not to save me. Only I and my behavior can save me. This is extremely important and indicative of David and why he was chosen to be the king. But if God should say, I don't want you, I'm not interested in you. Remember, this is David speaking in his humility, understanding that he was a sinner, he was a grave sinner, and knowing very well that that is what led to this disaster. And if God decides that this should be my fate, that my fate should be that I will die at the hands of my son, then he will do to me that which he wants. In other words, it is God's decision to decide the justice. God will decide whether I should survive or not survive. God will decide whether or not I come back to Jerusalem. So therefore, Vayomer HaMelech al Tzadok HaKohen, the king said to Tzadok, the priest, Haro'eh ata shuva ha'ir b'shalom. Haro'eh ata meaning, do you see? And the seeing is important here. It means, do you understand? Right? Shuva ha'ir b'shalom. Go back to the city in peace. V'achimatz bincha v'Yehonatan ben Evyatar shnei b'nechem itchem. And Achimatz, your son, and Yehonatan, the son of Evyatar, those are your two sons. Right? I'm sorry. Shnei v'nechem, the two sons of the two of you, right? Achimatz, your son, and Yehonatan, the son of Evyatar, who's the other Kohen, the Kohen Gadol, right? They should go back with you. So he tells Tzadok, you go back, and the Achimatz and Yehonatan should go back. Re'u anochi mitmamea ba'arvot hamidbar. You'll look, watch. I am going to wait around a little bit. I'm going to delay. Instead of running directly into the wilderness right now, I'm going to wait around ba'arvot hamidbar and in the I see some translations in the steppes of the wilderness, in the hills, the low hills that lead into Midbar Yehuda, the Judean desert. Ad bo davar me'imachem lahagid li, until you come and tell me what's going on. Right? So in other words, you go back, and I'm going to wait here until you come back and bring the news. Vayashav Tzadok ve'Evyatar ataron alem Yerushalayim vayeshu sham. And Tzadok and Evyatar brought the ark of God back to Jerusalem, and they remained there. This symbol of bringing the ark back to Jerusalem is crucial, and I explained why before, but more so, it's David saving the city and not himself. It's David acting as a king, understanding that Jerusalem has now become the capital city. The image of the capital city in ruins is one that David absolutely wants to make sure never occurs. And David understands that it's much more important to bring about the safety of the city and its symbols of greatness, of which the ark is, of course, the greatest and highest one of those symbols. That belongs in the city. So it's not me that's important, David is saying, but the capital city of the Jewish people that's important. And this is an incredible act of humility that it's hard to imagine some of the other kings which we've read about until now, and some other kings which we're going to read back out about from here on in, would act in such a way. David oleh b'maleh hazitim, and David went up on the slope up the Mount of Olives. Oleh uvache, as he was going, he was crying. V'rosh lo chafoy, and his head was covered. V'olech yachef, and he was going barefoot. V'chol ha'am asher ito, and all of the people that were with him, chafu ish rosho, they covered their heads. V'yalu alo uvacho, they were going up crying and crying because they were leaving as refugees. V'David higid leimar. So the David said, David was told by one of the spies that was loyal to him, that because people were coming to David giving him reports. As we saw, he just sent some active spies, the two sons Achimatz and Yehonatan and Tzadok the Kohen. Achitophel bakoshrim im Avshalom, that Achitophel, your trusted advisor, is one of the conspirators, and he is on Avshalom's side. Vayomer David, and David said, and this was a prayer that he turned to God, Sakel na et atzat Achitophel Adonai. God, twist around or mess up Achitophel's advice. Achitophel is apparently a very wise person, and David respected his advice very much. And having him advise Avshalom was scary to David, because that would give Avshalom a tremendous advantage. And David prays to God that God mess up his advice, so they shouldn't give good advice. Vayi David bo'ad harosh, and when David came to the top of the mountain, asher yishtachaveh sham Le'Elohim, the mountain where people would bow to God. Nowadays, from the top of Mount of Olives, one sees directly into the Temple Mount. Whether or not this is already a practice before the actual temple was in place, or whether or not this was referring to the fact that the top of the mountain was a place of worship, either to God or to other idols, is unclear. But clearly, this is the top of the mountain was already a place of worship. And Hushai the Arki was coming to greet him. Karua kutanto va'adamo al rosho. His robe was torn, and there was earth on his head in a symbol of mourning. Hushai Arki is a supporter of David, and he comes to greet him. Vayormelo David, and David said to him, Im avarta iti, if you do march with me, v'hayisa alai lemasa, you will become a burden to me. So I don't need more people wandering out with me. V'im ha'ir tashuv, but however, if you go back to the city, now remember, Achimatz and Yehonatan and Tzadok went back to the city, Jerusalem, and stayed there. But they were known to be David's supporters. Hushai Arki is convenient because he has demonstrated himself in this juncture to be a supporter of David. However, it is not yet known if he's a supporter of David to the public. So therefore, if you go back to Jerusalem, Avshalom Avdecha Ani, right, and you tell Avshalom that you are his servant, Ani Hamelech Eheyeh, right? Avdecha Ani Hamelech Eheyeh. I'm sorry, I have to read that phrase in complete together. That I will be your servant, the king, to the king. Eved avicha va'ani me'az, I was a servant of your fathers before. Va'ata va'ani avdecha, but now I will be your servant. Vehefarto li et atzas Achitofel. Then you can be there. You can be my plant. After having told Avshalom falsely that you are loyal to him, you could remain loyal to me, and then you can carry out, you can mess up the wise words of Achitophel. So I want to point out that when David turned and prayed to God before, in the end of the 2 verses ago, and prayed to God, God, please mess up Achitophel's advice, right? There's many ways of understanding this. If one understands this in a sense of petitionary prayer, David turned to God and asked, and then he was answered by Hushai Arki showing up all of a sudden and giving David a way to mess up Achitophel's advice. One can look at this in a different light as well. And when David turned and said and prayed, please mess up Achitophel's advice, it doesn't say even that he prayed to God. We made that assumption. This verse doesn't say that. Point being, David prayed, but the kind of prayer, the meaning of prayer is to inspire one to act and do, right? David said, please mess up Achitophel's advice, and then immediately he had the strength and the wisdom to do the preparations necessary and make the decisions necessary to protect himself and his kingdom by finding and setting up a spy. So as soon as he saw Hushai Arki, he immediately realized, oh, now I have a good plan. Vahalo, and by the way, Im Chasham, together with you, is Tzadok v'Aviatar HaKohanim, Tzadok and Aviatar, and of course they're 2 sons as well, but David doesn't mention them right here in this verse. And everything you hear going on in the king's house, Tagid l'Tzadok le'Aviatar HaKohanim, you can tell it over to them. So they will be your method of communication, and then they'll be able to come back out. Remember, David had sent them back with the ark, saying, set up the ark, stay there, so that you can be carriers of news to me. So now David has an entire spy network set up so that he can spy on Avshalom, so that he can know what's going on and take whatever action deemed necessary. Hine sham imam shnei b'neihem, and together with them are their 2 sons, David says. No, the 2 fathers and their 2 sons, Achimatz l'Tzadok. Achimatz is Tzadok's son, Yonatan l'Aviatar, and Yonatan is Aviatar's son. son, Ushlachtem bi'adam elai kol davar asher tishma'u, and through them you can send any news that you hear that you feel that's useful for me to know. Vayavo Chushai re'et David ha'ir, and Chushai, David's friend, then went into the city. V'Avshalom yavo Yerushalayim. At about this time, Avshalom arrived in Jerusalem. So here you have David and his camp at the top of Mount Olives, from which you can see Jerusalem of David's day. You can look straight down and see it. If anyone's ever visited the area, you can imagine it in your mind right now. At the same time, Avshalom is entering the city. David is at the top of Mount Olives talking to Hushai. But as soon as Avshalom is coming in, if David were to continue to travel to the east, he would immediately be out of the sights of Avshalom. That concludes chapter 15. Thank you so much for studying chapter 15 together. Looking forward to studying chapter 16 and, of course, the rest of this entire book of Shmuel together.